Hello and welcome. This is Lessons for Full Spectrum Humans. So this is the 2017 second semester. It's October 27th today, and I'm speaking all about basically the death journey. So this is level 1, and I'm going to speak about the basics of this time vortex. I draw this all the time, quite often in this class, about exactly what it is to navigate this, what the journey of death was, why it was invented, why this happened, and then Flying Rainbow Lasagna as a transcendent tool to either redefine death or have a new experience of death. I'm going to talk all about the religious, basically, backstory or the origins of our social conception of afterlife. And in level 2, I'm going to, just like in advanced physics, I'm going to take those basic concepts and apply it to what we're experiencing in our journey right now. And our journey, when I say that, I'm talking about transforming from a world where we have a separation of spirit or energy or consciousness, like this abstract, non-material stuff, with the material world of stuff we can touch with our 5 senses, other people that we can all see and agree are there, and basically what we define as objective, the world of objective materialism. So I'm here sitting in this particular setup so that you can see this painting that I've got in the background, and also the Flying Rainbow Lasagna sculpture. This is the whole idea that we are in this transformative moment. And this painting, you can kind of see most of it. It's got the 2 halves of Earth, and let me just put down this sculpture and get this one. Earth has an ordinarily toroidal or donut-shaped magnetosphere, and this is the magnetic envelope that is created by the rotating core in our planet, and it's essentially like the chakra system or energy field on a planetary level, and that it's an essential part of our planetary, we would say, immune system or protective magnetic envelope, that this helps to shield us from excessive solar and cosmic radiation. It's very, very important. And I've spoken about in the lesson on harmonics how in our solar system there are a couple of planets that unfortunately do not have healthy magnetospheres anymore, and that's because they underwent this planetary like rape and death mining process that these satanic or technology using malevolent beings have done to different planets in our solar system. So our planet has been attacked for over 10 or 20,000 years. This is not new. This is not new information. And if this is the first time that you're hearing about this, I've been very responsible in terms of sharing this information, in the right order, so that people do not misinterpret it or have an undue emotional response in finding that out. But I think this is pretty much common knowledge now, so I don't have to be so very concerned about that. But yes, our planet was invaded, our genetic code was invaded, and the entire functioning of consciousness and the flow of energy throughout our planet was impeded. So this now goes down to that galactic backstory, but also I'm bringing this up because we're in a very triumphant moment right now, where you can see in that painting, Earth's magnetosphere has transformed into the Flying Rainbow Lasagna shape. And that is the whole idea, that each one of us can take our energy system's time body that is usually shaped like this, and when we jump into the next highest dimension, we turn it into a shape like this. And when we do that, gain an additional degree of freedom and gain the capacity to rearrange the events that are wrapped around the skin of the torus. And the events that are wrapped around the skin of the torus are the last moments of your life. Now I draw with pictures. Wait, let me put this down over here. I know I have to duck off camera to do that. Okay, so the lower quadrant of this sculpture right here, I am always simplifying as a time vortex, and that's this right down here. So that's a flat cross section, but we understand that this is a actual volumetric structure, like the bottom of this sculpture. It's an actual vortex, and that the energy does not go in these straight lines up like this, the way that I'm drawing that, that's a simplification, but that it actually winds around the spiral like this. That's a much more accurate depiction, But I draw these shorthand like this. It's just like in order to say that we can see what's happening more easily when I do this little shorthand. And also I make this look like a big, giant, fat opening, but it's actually the tiniest opening that you could possibly imagine, like the tiniest, cinchiest little circle up there. So the whole idea is that we have the central convergence point, the center of this sculpture, what would be known as the 0th dimension, or the infinity, or the presence of everything, or the presence of all possibilities and probabilities, and that consciousness energy is emanated, let's choose a color, outward from that central convergence point. And then down here, this would be considered the material realm. And this is where we begin the journey. Down here, I always put 0 because that is 0, that in time, it's birth, it's where you were born. But you aren't just born, well, let's say, you aren't just born one time, but here's what is supposed to be happening. Let me speak now about the ideal state. Ideally, we were supposed to be emanated outward from the source and then come over here to this, like the ballerinas begin in first position, and then just go upwards, 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 until we get right back to that central convergence point, and I make the infinity loop. Because look, this is, I'm changing colors so that you can see. It's a big giant circle, a big giant circle, a big giant circle, a big giant circle. That's what we're supposed to be doing, just experiencing this big giant circle. And this is a point of consciousness that is emanating us. And during our journey coming out here, we're supposed to stay connected to that consciousness. And we're supposed to stay connected to that consciousness as we move through time and return back to, that state of connection. But that's not what has happened because of the genetic squashing. The genetic squashing means that there are invaders that live in this membrane over here. So this membrane is supposed to be like a flowing artery of consciousness where energy can easily flow along the membrane and get to where it needs to go. But we've had blockages here. I'll use like a green, like imagine these are like fatty blockages. There are things here so that energy cannot easily get past there. And those things that are there are trapped, undigested emotional experiences or aspects of consciousness. So now let's describe in terms of death. Wait. Let me go back to the ideal world. We're not supposed to have to even touch this membrane over here. We are supposed to just travel in this circle like this without ever hitting the edge. I used in the introduction the example of that old children's game, Operation, where you have like the little opening and there's a bone inside of there and you have to reach in and get the bone. But if you touch the edge, then it makes a buzzing sound. You know that you have lost the game because you're not supposed to touch the edge. Well, these edges right here, that's like in the game of Operation. If you touch this area here, you die. And this is also, let me just drink some water. This is not meant to be a punishment. Let me drink water. It really is a divine and benevolent creator-composer that created all of this beautiful system. And the idea was that we were created with these higher faculties. What are the higher faculties? It's I'll show pictures of it. Let me get pictures. We were created with these higher faculties to be able to see through time, to be able to look down the road of time and know what is coming. So here's higher faculties. Right here. This energy center that is right in the center of your head, that is a third eye. Like you've got eye 1, eye 2, and eye 3. And this eye allows us to be able to see down the road of time in front of us. So if this is that time vortex that I was just drawing, we are supposed to be able to see if we are oriented, like right now I'm going towards the membrane of death. Hey, that's not where I want to go. I actually want to be over here going up in this direction. How can I see that? I can see that using these higher faculties. So your higher faculties do not merely perceive the photons of light that are bouncing around in the physical room around you. Your higher faculties are like an eyeball that can perceive possibilities and probabilities over here in the time field. And we were invented and created not to have to ever touch, that's a horrible drawing, not to ever have to touch this membrane here, but instead to have perfect vision and be able to come into a physical body, maintain our connection to higher dimensional less dense realms, and circulate through, and the whole entire time be sending back a real-time broadcast of our experiences here so that we can say, like, if the sun and the stellar network are the emanators, like the composers, they're like Mozart, they made the music, and we're down here playing the music. We want to be connected to one another. It's not like, okay, here's a bunch of dead music, you can't change it, you have to just do it the way I told you to. That's not what it is. And this is the music. The music is the music of time. And I really use this analogy that if you're a good musician, you get to keep on being in the band. And if you're not a good musician, then you literally break your instrument, which is your body, you die, you get sick and you die, and you don't get to be in the band anymore. Well, now let me change colors. That is exactly what happened to these little fatty deposits that are on the interstices. So I need to make a distinction now between those beings, or that level of consciousness that was never actually formally embodied in a physical, organic, multicellular structure like you and I have, these bodies that need to eat and, poop and have water and have sleep and rest. Hello, Joelle, welcome. And you are just at the beginning, so don't worry, you haven't missed very much. I'm just doing recap on basically defining terms. What is this membrane of death? So according to the Galactic History webinar that I've given, the beings who emanated themselves, but not on a bridge of love. Because when you emanate yourself on a bridge of love, and emanate yourself means from infinity, from the 0th dimension. When the great composer tells you to, or the great conductor tells you to play, it's like rest, 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 play. And play means get born. And guess what? Getting born means you come into a physical body, and the portal through which you come in has a great deal to do with this inner eye, or your pineal gland, which produces the substance DMT. This is produced when the fetus reaches a certain level of inner development and inner brain development, that it can actually create this chemical. This chemical is like an interdimensional portal, much like the flying rainbow lasagna is an interdimensional portal. So this allows consciousness to come into the body. And then the other times when DMT is produced is when you're leaving your body, when you die. So this is the whole idea, though, that you're not supposed, the beings who emanated themselves not on a bridge of love, they found themselves, let's say, as ride-alongs to physical, corporeal, incarnated, like in the flesh beings, and they smashed their guitars on stage, dying, destroying everything. And then they've been here in this membrane between worlds for all of what we call recorded human history. Can't emphasize that enough, that humanity does have a very limited viewpoint or amnesia, that humanity right now, what human history is only able to understand what has happened roughly over the past 5 or 7,000 years at the most. There's of course a lot more before then, because that is what happened when we had that, it's almost like a break, a paragraph break or a break in the music, and everything changed and everything got recalibrated. So this is, let me go back to my face, the invention of death, and drink a bit of water. So I'm also going to relate this to some ancient mythology. So in ancient Egyptian mythology, and also, okay, what happened? Antediluvian, sophisticated worldwide culture, known right now mythologically as Atlantis, but it wasn't just one continent, it was a whole culture on our planet. That culture is represented by the character named Osiris in this ancient Egyptian myth. The myth goes, there was a person named Osiris who was married to Isis. It's nothing at all to do with any current political organizations at all, that these were like representatives of the Atlantean culture, and that there was a jealous being named Set, sounds a lot like Satan, that lived on Mars, the red planet, and red associated with the color red, who was jealous of Osiris, and who basically invented death by killing Osiris and dismembering him. So this is not a literal story, or I would recommend you not take it as a literal story, but instead as an allegory. The idea that Osiris was a culture that was active on our planet, and that another culture or being, entity grouping from another nearby planet was dissatisfied with this earthly culture and had an impact here. This is basically what happened. This was the invasion, the invention of death. So we're talking about the time of what we're known as the immortals, or the gods and the goddesses. Everyone at that time entered the time field into a physical body, did not experience disease or physical degradation or suffering in any way. There was comfort, there was joy, there was euphoria. Being in a body was like the most wonderful, fun, euphoric experience possible. And then you existed in your body for as long as you wanted to, moving through chronologically through the time fields, up that central convergence point, up this central convergence point here, until you reached your final denouement, finished the narrative structure of the story. And all of this was not flying blind. And if we look at this like a series of calculations, that the difference between flying in this direction and hitting the membrane of death, and flying in this direction and going, you know, directly up that central convergence point, like I'm going up my sculpture there, is a difference of, we could call it calculations, but they're not necessarily the type of calculations that you do with Arabic numerals 1 + 1 = 2, that they're more the type of calculations that maybe a basketball player does when they're dribbling the ball down the court and they're trying to figure out how many other players are there, where do I have to go, and what do I have to do in order to get that ball into the basket, or the same type of calculations that a pilot or a bird does in order to see, I'm flying through space, where am I flying, how close am I to the ground, how close am I to that tree. These are all calculations that we're doing. So some of it we're understanding with most people have binocular vision, so we're making constant on the fly minute calculations between I1 and I2, and that gives us the sense of where things are in space, you know, in terms of how close they are to us. When we add in our inner eye, we're also adding in the multidimensional view of time, how there are different possible pathways through time, and what we're attempting to do is choose the right pathway and fly on the pathway that is the infinite pathway. That means that we don't have to hit the membrane of death, we don't have to stop. Now let me also grab this photo and tell you more about being at a canted angle or being askew in terms of one's chakras or energy centers, because I want to bring up this picture. Here we go. So this is an old glass piece, and it shows you pretty well how each chakra or energy center of your body, like these are all nested together, but here I've shown them unnested, like those Russian or Ukrainian dolls that have been unnested out of their ordinary positions. And let me bring up a pencil now so I can show you this. So because we have these different layers of being or different layers of reality, it's not like we only have one focus or one bullseye. We have many different bullseyes. So now I'm pointing on the yellow one. The yellow one might be askew this amount, but maybe green is perfectly in alignment, but then maybe turquoise is this amount of askew, but then maybe indigo is perfectly in alignment, and maybe this one is slightly askew, and then maybe this orange one down here, maybe this one's like this. This is a recipe. This is a set of calculations. This is a set of different parameters or variables. And every time you add a variable, the system becomes more complex, and there's more opportunities for calculations and variables in more combinations or iterations. So we have 7 basic energy centers, but then within those 7 basic energy centers, each energy center has 7 layers, and it gets more and more complex. It's like the branching of artery to blood vessel to, smaller blood vessel to eventual capillary. Like this is how it goes through our body. So I'm also trying to say that, I really steer clear of associations with what would be called the New Age movement or New Age language. When people talk about quote unquote balancing their chakras, I think this is what people are talking about, because your chakras, you can have a variety of positions, everything from being in perfect alignment like this to being wobbly, to being totally out of control and wobbly. So if you're totally out of control and wobbly, that's like playing very bad music in the time field. I won't play bad music, but I got my little piano over there. Like imagine I'm mashing the keyboard, crunch, crunch, crunch. It sounds terrible. That would be like if this chakra was like this one like this one like this. It just means all of these foci of awareness are hitting the membrane of death. So let me get back. Wait, I don't even have to. Let me choose a different color and I'll draw right over here. If this is that time field, and that's the side view, this is that time field from the top down. And here's that, bullseye that we're trying to head towards. And let me also drink a little bit of water. We are trying to focus awareness in exactly the same way. Just drinking water here. In exactly the same way, like this is your retina of your eyeball over here, and here's your focal point of your eyeball. And then all of this other stuff that I'm going to highlight in red, This is all your peripheral vision. And with the way that my eyes and perception work right now, I'm using my focal point to focus on the screen and look at what I'm looking at. I'm not really looking at the periphery. I can see like there's some junk over there, there's some junk over there. Like we're not focused on the periphery. It's meant to just show us very gross movement, just the very, unrefined idea that stuff is there. Well, that's the same exact thing over here in this bullseye that represents the time field. That all of this stuff that I'm highlighting in red, that's just the periphery. That is meant to be just the peripheral possibilities of events that you're not supposed to actually experience. So let's say this red line represents, let's do more consistent colors. Let's say this yellow line represents a timeline that you're going down. Like I get up in the morning, I drink a cup of coffee, walking outside my front door in order to get the mail at the mailbox. Like that's what this timeline represents. Here is waking up and here is moving forward through time and walking to my mailbox. And let's say that this red stuff that I'm pointing to, like this is all on the sides, the periphery of that pathway. Those are all of the other possibilities and probabilities and unlikelihoods that can also occur. So some of these red zones, what happens? You trip over your bathrobe and you fall down the stairs and break your neck and die. That happens on some timelines. You never even make it to the mailbox. There's eaten by crocodiles, abducted by pirates, meteors fall on your head, blue ice falls on your head from a commercial air flight, any of the great unlikelihoods. These are peripheral possibilities. They're not the real central focus of your experience. And you can even be aware of these peripheral possibilities. Like you can see like, oh, look at that. I almost tripped on the hem of my bathrobe. I almost tumbled down the stairs, but luckily I didn't. Not luckily you did it. Not luck has nothing at all to do with it. It has to do with everything with the focus of your attention. Attention from Greek attenuos, meaning to reach out. You're reaching out like an elephant's trunk and sensing through time. So if you successfully navigate your front steps, your front porch to your mailbox to get your mail in the morning, then what you have done is used your higher faculties to align. Instead of like going over here into the membrane of death, you are instead, let me change colors, going up this central timeline until you get to this exit point. And that's the exit point, the wormhole that allows you to go like a doorway that you use to return to infinity or to continue this endless journey. So let me do a little bit of a personal experience. Like I'll share a personal anecdote, and this is very relevant. This is what's going on literally right now in California where I live. Let me just drink a little bit of water. I moved to this location along about September of this year, and I shopped around for different apartments, and one of the places that I shopped was in the town that is one town south of me. And I live in Ojai now, so there's a town that is on the highway just one town south of me. And I didn't get that place. I'm happy that I got the place where I did. Not only because I like the studio where I am right now, but also because that place, one town south of me, just had a spontaneous brush fire that could have turned into a real conflagration. But we're super appreciative of CAL FIRE. They're the local and state agencies that they have really good fire response. So they were on top of it. So they put out the fire, and so it only affected some vegetation. It didn't really burn any houses, and it didn't spread. This is looking at different timelines and different possibilities. I'll draw it out so that you can see what I'm talking about. If we say, let's just, very basically say, these are all a bunch of different possibilities. And on this timeline over here, that is a peripheral timeline where I actually moved to that town that was one south of where I lived, and where there was a spark of a fire that started a big fire that, burned up the apartment that I was in. That's one, here, let me grab a red pen, one time when I hit the membrane of death. That I was able to see, because I looked in my peripheral vision, over the past couple of days. Basically, I affirmed to myself, wow, I'm so happy that I didn't travel on this timeline over here, that I used my higher faculties to instead go on to this timeline over here and travel through time in this direction so that I would not hit the membrane of death. So it's just a very, macroscopic, exaggerated example from my own life, because of course there are examples where you move to that apartment, but then the conflagration didn't get too big. But we're just talking about where you can see. It's like I use the example of, like a dodging a negative possibility, that you can see, wow, if I had made different life choices, I would have been down that pathway, I would have been experiencing that, and that it could have led to this instead. So the whole idea is, if we're navigating the time field well, we're using our inner vision. Some people call it intuition, but it is far beyond mere intuition, because I'm not intuitive about the way that I do these paintings. I'm pointing to like this pattern painting in my background here. It's not intuitive. It's not like I'm like, I kind of feel, I kind of sense that it should be violet. It's not like that at all. It is very accurate. It's very incontrovertible. Like, there is no question. I see it very clearly, and I'm like, oh, this needs to be violet, and this needs to be blue, and this needs to be green, and I know exactly what is going. Just like if you're looking at if you were looking at my studio, you wouldn't be like kind of feeling with your toes and be like, if your eyes were closed, be like, okay, I kind of feel with my toe over here. There's nothing I can go over here, and then I can go over here. Like, that's not what it's like. It's not like feeling forward with your toes or moving forward slowly until your nose hits the membrane of death and being like, okay, time for me to switch. Like, that's what some people do. They just nose forward until they're almost at the membrane of death, and then it's like time to change really, really fast. No, it would be like if you were in my studio, you could say like, oh, I clearly see there's a chair there. There's an obstacle there. Don't step there because there's a thing there. That's what effectively navigating the time field is like. So basic summation here. Let me just look at what my time is like. How can I find my time? Good. Doing good on time. Basic summation is that we were not intended to fly blind. We were intended to have our activated higher faculties and our connection to the divine, to the great composer, to the great narrator, to the scriptwriter that's actually writing the events of our life. Like, imagine the great scriptwriter is writing, and then Aurora, picked up her coffee mug and walked down her front porch and walked down the steps to get the mail in the morning. The scriptwriter did not write the story to say, and then was abducted by pirates or eaten by crocodiles or had a meteorite fall on her head. That's not what the scriptwriter wrote. That would be like the most tangential, peripheral, unbelievable, great unlikelihood that's all peripheral gobbledygook. But if you need to explore that in the choose your own adventure novel of your life, then you get to explore that. So part of this is also the understanding that death is a focuser of awareness. Let me put down my little sculpture over here. I always have so many things I want to hold on to and do. This is like a laser or a light beam, and we are trying to focus it until it is perfectly coherent, like a laser beam. And all of these peripheral visions, peripheral versions rather of self, that's like what we see in the side view of our eyes. We're not actually supposed to turn our focus on that. We're not actually supposed to say, let me explore in great depth what it would have been like if I had moved to the wrong apartment and been burned to death in a forest fire. I don't need to know about that. If I needed to know about that so in depth, I would put my mind on that timeline and experience it. So now let me also make this distinction, because I've brought up those pesky occupiers of the interstices, and I use these lighthearted terms just so that people don't freak out and so that we, keep the proper attitude. It's like fighting a war. It's like diminishing your enemy. They're really, really, truly horrible people. They are truly horrible, malevolent entities. And part of the horrible aspect of them is that they do not recognize the very real suffering of beings whom are navigating the time field. Very real suffering, because it's kind of like this. And I'll use this television show that is worthwhile in order to give a good example. There's a TV show called Westworld that was on HBO like last year, I guess. And it's worth delving. It's all about clones. And the clones live in a particular theme park, amusement park that is made for humans to go and interact there. And so the clones are constantly killed as part of the storyline, which is like the Old West. They're shot or stabbed or whatever, and they get sent back for recycling, and they get fixed up, and then they come back forward with their memories wiped. And the idea is that the human operators of this quote unquote fun park do not recognize that the suffering is very real. It's not like, oh, you're causing a death and the person feels blood pouring out of them, and then, it's not a real experience. For the clones, it is a very real experience. Now, I am not equating you or me or anyone in this audience. I presume none of us are synthetic humanoids. None of us are replicants. I'm not talking to any replicants. I'm talking to all beautiful, organic, multicellular beings. And let me confirm and affirm to you, I am an organic, multicellular being. I'm not a clone. I'm not a synthetic being at all. And I have to say that because I do describe myself as a galactic walk-in, but I have to tell you, I'm not artificial in any way. I'm literally a biologically created and naturally born human that has, through transforming the shape and dance and behavior of DNA, been able to have a different experience. So someone is asking me, let me go to the chat so I can answer this. Okay, good. Look at your questions. We need some question answer. So Joelle is asking, Aurora, are there a lot of replicants on the planet right now? Hey, I'm going to get into this and I'll talk more also in level 2, but this is just a really good opportunity. So I don't do, in these recordings, I attempt to be impeccable with the information that I share, meaning like if I am a physics teacher, I'm only going to teach about the things that I know are really true. I'm not going to speculate and give a lot of nonsense out there as if it is real truth. So I've been sticking to only the things that I see empirically, and I haven't been taught, like there's a lot of video topics that I could do if I just wanted to be popular and, get more hits on my videos. And, so lots of people like to talk about the cloning centers and all these different things and Hollywood stars and who's a clone and who's real and who's all of this. So let me just take the time now to really respond to this. Yes. There are a significant number of people in our society on planet Earth right now that I would define as artificial people. And this is tough because people are going to try to be like, Aurora, isn't that the pot calling the kettle a little black? You're an artificial person. No. I am not an artificial person at all. My persona or my ego, Aurora, this narrative structure, like this sense of self, was created in chronological adulthood. However, I am as real as any of the participants in this webinar, as any person that developed their ego structure between age 1 and 3 and learned, oh, my name is John, or my name is Sally, and this is my favorite color, and this is my favorite sweater. But I did that at age 28, 29, and 30. And, when the body was like, the body didn't have to learn how to, walk and talk and do things like that, that it was a different experience. But I developed my sense of self in the same exact way that other egos develop their sense of self. So I'm trying to say, no one programmed me at the clone center. You know what I'm talking about? I'm not like that at all. So now let me get into this. And I should drink water too. The birth and conception. Many beings have been conceived on Earth that are not actually meant to be on Earth. And I don't want everyone to Dwayne Hubler over this. Dwayne Hubler, this is a reference to brilliant Kurt Vonnegut story called Breakfast of Champions. Read it. It's really good writing. It's worth it. And there's also, I think, a pretty funny movie about it. Breakfast of Champions. Dwayne Hubler is an out-of-work used car salesman who finds a discarded science fiction manuscript and reads it, and the manuscript is written in like the first person saying, you are this, or the second person saying, you are this, and he thinks that it's literally an instruction manual from the cosmos that is telling him that he is the only real person in the world and that everyone else is a synthetic replicant. So of course he picks up an AK-47 and decides to, kill everybody around you. So I don't want everybody to fly off the handle and go Dwayne Hubler on all this if I tell you that, yes, there are a significant number of people that are in the world that are not actually supposed to be in the world, that they've either their conception, literal conception of their body was not supposed to happen, because this is due to dark magic, distortion of the time field. When I talk about time being like an embroidery, sometimes it means cutting threads. The threads are supposed to continue onward, timelines that are supposed to continue onward, but part of dark magic is cutting threads, murdering people, killing people who are supposed to still be here. And you can tell I'm a little mad about that because guess what? They tried to murder the person that used to be in this body. That was really not cool. And that's why I am here as Aurora. So as Aurora, I'm like rectifying the time field. I'm saying, oh, no, that thread is not going to be cut. I'm going to extend that thread through Flying Rainbow Lasagna. And that's why Flying Rainbow Lasagna is allowed to be in existence. It does not contravene or come into conflict with any of the previously established rules or basic givens of the math proof of the cosmos. And one of the other things that the dark magic does is it artificially puts threads into the embroidery of the time field. Timelines that aren't supposed to be there, the conception of beings that aren't actually supposed to be there. So you could think of this either as mommy plus daddy are never actually supposed to meet, and they're definitely never supposed to actually have sex, and they're definitely never supposed to actually conceive a baby, but through dark magic they do. Or you could think of it in terms of artificial insemination or in vitro fertilization or some synthetic way of creating life. So, and I don't mean to also cast aspersions on anyone that has been created through in vitro fertilization. Like, I'm not trying to say to you, you die because you're an artificial person. Like, no, Dwayne Hugler, that's not what I'm trying to say. But I am trying to say that there are many versions of people walking around right now that are not who they are really supposed to be. So some people are artificially created into the time field. Some people's lives are artificially extended. We can think of a lot of these billionaires, and I like to joke, their faces look like a melted paper bag, They look all wrinkled up and horrible. They have long since passed their expiration date. Some of these old, disgusting old billionaires, they have used dark magic, and dark magic means, Tech knows who I'm talking about. He's talking about like Soros, some of these Rockefellers, some of these old wrinkled up Kissingers, like they look ugly. And I'm not just trying to say that all ugly people are evil, but I am trying to say that at a certain point, your deeds catch up with you and it shows on your face, because they're bad musicians. When you're a good musician, literally, you maintain health and vitality in your body by playing the right notes. Playing the right notes means doing the right physical activities with your body, thinking the right things, feeling the right things, doing the right things with your ego. So playing the right notes does not mean, I'm going to like vampire a bunch of energy off of those people over there, and that's how I'm going to stay young and beautiful. That's not playing the right notes at all. Playing the right notes means, look, I have a connection to the divine. I have a connection to what we would call God or a higher dimensional source, and that's where I get all of my energy from. Playing the right notes means connecting through your inner eye to the sun and the stellar network, so that you can get all of your cells filled with vitality through doing that. So I attempt to be a template for that level of vitality, to show everyone we can move through time chronologically without growing more decrepit as we move through time. And you don't vampire your energy like a parasite off of other people. You get your energy directly from, the sun or the source or God or divinity, or however you want to describe that. So yeah, there are people that aren't supposed to be in the time field. There are people who have artificially extended their selves through the time field, and through dark magic practices, there are beings who have transferred their consciousness from generation to generation. This is intergenerational soul transfer. And there's a whole PDF about this. I didn't write it. I don't really express myself through writing that much. But yeah, there's many writers who have explored this. It's ancient practices that go back through, we could call it dark magic. Some of it is Northern European magic. Some of it is like associated with the Kabbalah. But basically, it is a form of satanic or extraterrestrial malevolent technology. Now, don't be concerned. Tech is saying crap, because we're at that moment now with Flying Rainbow Lasagna, where all of these old systems are being dismantled and defanged. Let me just get the whiteboard and draw this out for you, because the way that the intergenerational soul transfer happens. Like if this is grandpa, G for grandpa, and then this is D for dad, and then this is S for son, and each one of this is a generation, is what I'm drawing. That the intergenerational soul transfer often goes, this guy's evil malevolent consciousness jumps over the father's generation and then gets implanted into the son. And a lot of times the father's generation is totally out to lunch. They get blinded. They don't even know what is going on. And this doesn't just happen in one generation. Now I'll draw it out for you. Let's say this is ancient Sumeria, and let's say this is, like 2,000 years ago, and let's say this is right now. And that little, I want to call him fucker, that little red fucker, he's been jumping through generation, all the way up until now. That there are literal family demons that have transferred themselves through intergenerational soul transfer technology all the way down the line. It's kind of like a game to them, even though it is not a game, and I do not equate this with soulless or suffering, that there's no suffering in this game. That's what I was trying to say about the clones of Westworld. That there's real suffering, but the beings that are just transferring themselves through the time field, first of all, they never have to face accountability for what they have done. But now they do. All of those thousands of years of backlog is catching up with them. But for many thousands of years, they were able to kick the can down the road, endlessly defer. Like, oh, I have this huge debt, but I don't have to pay it in this generation. I'll just jump into another body, into another body, into another body. And there's another worthwhile book that I recommend to you that is called The Bone Clocks. It's by the same writer who did Cloud Atlas. It's fiction, but it explores a similar theme. The idea that there's a secret society that has been doing this for many thousands of years, and that this is the way that they have consolidated resources. Because if you are like, a vampire that can extend your consciousness through soul transfer for thousands of years, then you can make an investment of 1 penny and come back in 1,000 years and you get $1 billion back from your 1 penny. You know what I'm talking about? But the trick is, how do you claim that? How do you do it? So a lot of people do it through keeping the wealth in the family. So this is what I'm trying to talk about. The grandfather will transfer his soul into the grandson, bypassing the father. And then and this is with all of the karmic baggage of the grandpa, with all of the information of the grandpa. Oh, yes. Yes. Hello, Harmony. It is wonderful to see you here. First of all, thank you. And it's great to hear from you. And yeah, Harmony's got his own channel, and I recommend everyone check it out. And he's got a video that is all about Westworld as being an allegory. Let me just drink water, because I think that Westworld is a really brilliant modern allegory, that it gives us a cultural shorthand to talk about these things. So the idea is that these beings who occupy the interstices, they look at themselves as if they are virtuosos or overlords. They're not virtuosos. They have found a way to exploit the system or weaknesses within the system, but they are not virtuosos, whom I would define as beings who work within the parameters of the system. Like, that is what I do, that I bend the rules, but I don't break them. Like the idea of vibrating the singularity back and forth so fast that it's in two places at the same time. That's transcendence of the rules, bending the rules, not breaking them, as opposed to these other beings that are just thinking, how much can I defer until I finally have to pay that price? So I have a very different values system than those beings. So this is also like, thank you for giving me this opportunity to draw a distinction between myself and my own motivations. And I'm a good musician who follows the rules. I think you guys can tell that about me at this point, as opposed to these malevolent beings that are simply as exploitive as possible, looking to see how well they can keep going through time. And they look at the very real suffering of having to endlessly explore every single iteration before you make it to that central core timeline, where you escape, essentially. They look at it all as just an abstraction, which is not truthful. It's like saying, if like an old-fashioned videotape that you can record over and over. I mean, I'm sure that this points to me as a relic from another century. But yes, there used to be these things called videotapes where you could record over your favorite show over and over. So let's say you keep on recording a new version of your life. And the ones where you hit the membrane of death, those are recorded over. Well, according to these malevolent occupiers of the interstices, don't worry about that. That's been recorded over. It doesn't matter, except it actually does matter. And in the old-fashioned magnetic tapes of these videotapes, there would be like these ghosts, these old residues. Sometimes you have an artifact or residue or glitch from what you recorded over. And that's also part of the allegory of the Westworld show, that some of these clones start to have memories come through from their previous narrative structures, where instead they're remembering what they did in a different story that supposedly was mind wiped from them. So the suffering is real. The suffering is cumulative. Pain is real. And that's the whole point, is that those beings that occupy the interstices, they do not eat love. Love is a tone. Let me play the love tone. I've got my instrument set up down here. This is an A at 432 hertz. Love is a tone, a musical tone that we make. Hello, Annette, lovely to see you. When we fly through time at exactly the right rate, and the right rate is 1 moment per moment. That means we're not striving to get to the future faster. We're not clinging to the past. We are moving through the time field at exactly 1 moment per moment. Like, imagine you're like Pac-Man, and you're just, or Ms. Pac-Man, eating 1 dot at a time. You're not trying to jump forward and eat 2 dots, or 5 dots, or 10 dots. That's what it's like when we use our minds, our hacked human operating system, to try to think about what's going to happen tomorrow, what's going to happen the next day, what's going to happen in 12 years. So all of that is not respecting the time field and not being a respectful love maker and participant with what is happening in the time field. So yeah, basic takeaways from today's presentation. Suffering and death are real. These are not mere abstractions, even though when we get to that central core timeline, I'm pointing to the sculpture over here, when we get to the one that goes all the way up the center and we are no longer experiencing the peripheral realms, we have essentially, what we've done is taken the beam of light that is our awareness and focused it down until it's now a laser, and you're just looking down one little tunnel at the one pathway that leads out of this level of reality. That is what we are doing through exploring these endless iterations. So these endless iterations, that used to be the old-fashioned way of what we had to do before flying rainbow lasagna. It's like the choose your own adventure novels where you have to say, what happens if I do this? And what happens if I do this? And do this, and do this, and do this. And that's essentially what some of these books and movies that I mentioned explore. But what magical thing happens when we actually gain our higher faculties? When you can actually see ahead of time. I call it running parameters. And that means, what happens when you can actually anticipate? Like, I'm trying to think of any kind of sport, but I'm not that sports oriented, but any kind of sport where, like tennis or something like that, where you have to kind of calculate and anticipate, well, if that guy's going to hit the ball over there, then I'd better be over there in order to effectively hit it with my racket. That is what we can begin to do when we activate our higher faculties. It is a form of mathematical calculation, but again, not with Arabic numerals, the Arabic numerals of 1 + 1 = 2. It is the type of calculations that really good jazz musicians make, and they do it on the fly. That's why I bring up jazz all the time, because it's not classical music. It's not like where, this guy wrote this, composed this, 400 years ago, and we're playing the exact same notes over the past 400 years. Jazz is different. Jazz means we started off with this basic sound structure, but now we're taking it into these levels of exploration and putting together new combinations. So that is the idea, that with our bodies, we are performing these calculations through time of what happens when we place ourselves in a particular position in time. So now I'll use another little example, and I'll get to more questions, but let me just draw this because I wanted to share this idea with you guys, and I'll do more in level 2. Don't worry, I haven't ended we'll keep going with all this in level 2. So let's say this is me. Let's say this blue timeline is the one where I keep going to infinity, and that's clearly the one that I'm traveling on right now. And let's say that I'm right around here, and we're just about to exit the wormhole of infinity. Well, there's this pink timeline. Look, this pink timeline is right next to me over here, and it hits the membrane of death right there. It's not necessarily a better timeline because it hits the membrane of death. Let's say on that timeline, I'm actually a university professor. Like, I'm not just professor, a casual professor of flying rainbow lasagna here in my online class. Let's say I'm actually a teacher at someplace like Harvard or someplace big, and I teach physics and all sorts of things like that. And I have a completely different life, a completely different professional life, and I know different people. And you would say, well, doesn't that sound like a better timeline than the one that you're presently on? Everything except for the idea that over here it hits the membrane of death, and that could be something that's an external event that is not within my control, something like a giant worldwide catastrophe or a giant nuclear war or something like that. That the idea is that I'm better off on this timeline, this blue timeline over here, than the one that is right next to it, where it might seem like, oh, maybe I have more money, maybe I have more notoriety, or maybe it might seem like a better possibility, but it's not actually a better possibility because maybe a meteorite strikes Earth and it wipes out the biosphere, or a giant volcano explodes, or something like that happens. That this timeline is the preferable timeline because this is the timeline of flying rainbow lasagna. That's the path of least likelihood. Literally, the least likely thing that can happen is that everybody remembers their own divinity, wakes up to their inner powers, and transcends death. Okay. Oh yeah, very good stuff. I'm going to I got a few more minutes on this recording, and then I will get into level 2 and I'll do even more. Okay. So wait. And let me just go back to that. I got to finish up because I was on that question of replicants. So there's all sorts of different people that are here on Earth. First of all, there are negative walk-ins. There are beings who they're like rapists of the genetic code. I am like a love maker. I am like a romantic partner. I buy flowers and light candles and take the person out to dinner. Like, I'm very respectful as a partner. I don't just force my way in. There's plenty of beings that are on this planet right now that have simply forced their way in. And I understand that's why I have to make a distinction between who I am and my value system and who they are. There are beings who have been born on this planet through technology, through artificial means, and that's not necessarily the way that we are supposed to be born. So there are beings that don't necessarily belong on this planet. So like I was saying about threads that are here that are not actually supposed to be even in the time field, and there are threads that have been cut that are supposed to still be here but that aren't still here. So we have these profound levels of distortion, and there's also false elevation. And I joke about this too, that the person on this timeline that we know as President Obama, actually, if he had not been falsely elevated, he would have lived on a completely different timeline, where he would have just been like, a petty, low-level criminal. Maybe he would have been like a pimp, and maybe he would have had, a bunch of prostitutes that he sold around town or something like that. He was falsely elevated. I mean, that might be an offensive political example. There's a loud thing flying by outside. Sorry, motorcycle. And let me also ride my dog with the treats so that she doesn't bark. Here's another example that's maybe a bit less incendiary. Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley would have been a mechanic. He would have been the guy that fixed your transmission and had very nice hair. He would not have been a worldwide, international, musical superstar, but he was falsely elevated due to these time-distorting practices. So people are here who aren't supposed to be here. People are experiencing great levels of success, like physical manifested success, that are not supposed to have that level of success. And it's all because it's supposed to be a feedback. If you send out good music, if you're a good musician, you send out good music, you're supposed to have abundance and health and vitality. And if you play crappy music, like all of these, crappy melted paper bag billionaires, then you're not supposed to get a lot of money, and you're definitely not supposed to continue being alive through time. This is what I'm trying to say. In the antediluvian, sophisticated, worldwide realm that is a lot closer to my value system, people were strong and healthy and beautiful because we did the right things. We were all like Olympic athletes, the most beautiful and healthy people. And we were also all musical virtuosos, and we were all geniuses, and we were all, huge humanitarians that cared about people and gave charitably. We were the best people, because if you played crappy music, your body, which is your instrument, died. This is just like, it's a no-brainer, but we now live in this time that is very distorted, where people look around and they're like, oh, look, that guy, Bill Gates, he's got a face like a paper bag and he's got plenty of money. Like, don't use those people as the template for your own experience. Okay, so wait. All right. Now, more questions. All right. So Maya asks about the occupiers and the interstices. How are these entities related to reptilians? Excellent question. So reptilians, this does not mean literal lizard beings like that we would see, like a giant triceratops or something like that. There's a couple of different things. The human brain has a reptilian aspect to it, the brain stem, the pons, that just is like the basic structure, like the survival structure. And it's also analogous to the red chakra. It's just kill or be killed, or the capacity to have sex with something. It's the basic of being alive. The reptilian mind, in our mind, is not necessarily evil. It's evil if it is not mitigated by higher faculties like the mammalian mind and the human intellect and the heart and the capacity to speak or to communicate, and the capacity to have insight and see across time, and the capacity to be connected to the divine. So that basic reptilian structure, or that basic brain structure, is good. It's not something that we have to get rid of. But if it's not mitigated, then it's like, can you just stick a spoon into a pile full of like unbaked flour, like wheat flour or corn flour, and eat that? That is not a cake. Just eating flour is not a cake. And that's what just being at the basic levels of survival is analogous to. It's like just saying that that's the only level of reality. And there are so many other ingredients that make up the flavor of reality of who we are. So part of it, I'm trying to say, don't be too literal in understanding of reptilians. And yes, reptilians would be occupiers of the interstices, beings who do not have a body and who use that value system in order to scavenge or parasite energy off of the living and people who do actually have a body. And their justification is, hey, like kill or be killed, we gotta stay alive, and we gotta do all this different type of stuff. And in terms of occupiers of the interstices having an impact on the living, think of it as an overlay. or like a hand that goes in a glove, because I'm a different type of hand that goes in the glove of the human body, or a different type of rider that rides the physical cellular structure of a human body. There's really evil riders. You know, like imagine a jockey that just wants to beat its horse as much as possible, or stick spurs in its side and make it try to go faster, or feed it cocaine to try to make it go faster. Like, this is what some jockeys treat their horses in this way, and some human beings treat their physical bodies in this way. So think about that every time that you're disrespecting your body, that you're basically taking part in that reptilian social structure that basically is like kill or be killed. Or when your boss asks you to do that too, it's like sacrifice your body so that you can get some money. It's all bringing it down to that level. So yeah, there are people that are in our world right now who are controlled by what you would call the occupiers of the interstices, who are like reptilians, or who are like Draco, whatever word you want to use for them. They're beings who don't have their own body, and they use technology as containers for consciousness, and they attempt to take energy from the biological construct. Those are the beings that we're talking about. And when those beings control a physical body, it's like hand in a glove. They control a bunch of our political representatives. They control a bunch of our media figures. They control a bunch of our billionaires. They control a lot of people on this planet. So also the genetic structure makes some people more vulnerable to being controlled than others. And the more that you flying rainbow lasagna, the less easily controlled you are. And now you understand why the information that I present on this channel and through my artwork is often intentionally suppressed. Ha ha ha, please subscribe and share my videos as much as you can, free plug for me, because those evil occupiers of the interstices don't want the key to get out there. They don't want the information to get out there of how you transcend and how you no longer have those challenges and those difficulties. Okay, so Joelle is asking, what is the best way to cultivate the right tone? So you have to tune your physical body as your physical instrument. So this is its whole self-cultivation practices. There's many different schools of meditation and mindfulness. So a big part of it is being able to make a distinction between what are the thoughts that arise that are from within me, internally arising thoughts, and what are the thoughts that are coming in from some external source, like invader thoughts. So that's a big part of it. This is the journey of being an artist or a musician. That I, as an art teacher, can tell you, like, hey, here's what a pencil with an eraser is, or here's what a paintbrush is, but I cannot give you good taste. I cannot tell you what colors look good together, or what is important to paint, or anything about how you should run your own artwork. So that's all the journey of inner self-cultivation. So and playing the right notes has to do with exhibiting the right behavior in terms of ego. Like your ego, your narrative structure. If someone says something to you and you're like, I'm insulted and I hate you and I take out a gun and I shoot you, that's not playing the right notes as an ego. Playing the right notes as an ego is saying, oh, if someone else has said something and it hurt my feelings, then I should examine why my feelings are hurt and learn more about myself, and, you know, learn and grow and be cultivated as a person. Like, just like in that movie Groundhog's Day, that the main character had to be cultivated as a person, and he had to become less boorish and more sensitive to other people. That's how you become a good musician. You become more sensitive to the other musicians who are in the band and the music that they are playing. I have to be sensitive to all of the gut microbes that are playing in my tummy, and all of the other organisms that are on Earth. And that includes all of the other humans that are in this band. I'm a flying rainbow lasagna. I came to this planet. It's not cool for me to play music that does not integrate harmoniously with all of the other living organisms that are here. That would make me an unwelcome participant. So my challenge has been, let's get everybody playing the same music. Let's get everybody on the same beat. Let's get everybody tuned up. Let's get everybody on this level. So you can also see my ego structure, my music that I play. Hey, it's a music of personal empowerment, where each person gets to be in charge of their own life. It's a one where I express the value system of unconditional love, where I say, hey, be in the band or don't be in the band. Like, I ain't gonna force you. That's unconditional love. It's pretty much like saying, you're on your journey. You're allowed to do what you want to do. I'm not going to force you. You know, all the things that I express. And also in inclusiveness. I'm not the only flying rainbow lasagna. I'm the first one. I wrote this song, but I want everyone to, like, take the song and make it your own. Write covers of the song. You know, sing your own version of Stairway to Heaven. It's not just my song. I want everyone to sing the song. So all of these things represent, you know, the what I would call the good music of having an ego. Because having an ego does not have to be this boundary or membrane that separates you from other people in a negative way. It can be an effective interface where you recognize how we are all interconnected, and we're sharing positive aspects of self with one another. Refinery of characteristics. Okay, Joelle asks, can we start to just set our intention to align with our central timeline? Is it that easy? Yes, in many ways it is that easy, because if I asked everyone who has an arm in this class, please raise your arm, then I say, how did you do that? How did you raise your arm? You did it with your intention. That, like, we all mostly figured this out when we were little tiny infants, like, my brain is connected to my arm, and if I do this, then I can make it go up. But it's your willpower that makes you actually able to move your physical body. And we're not merely empowered to move our physical bodies through space and time. We are also empowered to move our consciousness through time. And we do that through our belief system and what we expect to happen. So you know what, I need to wrap up for level 1, but I'm going to go into level 2. I'm going to talk all about ancient Egypt and the sun bark and moving across the sky and what we're doing as a planet. So let me just move my sculpture, because I got to make sure that the recording isn't too long. This is end of level 1, but please stay tuned in for level 2, and I'll pick right up where I left off. Okay, thank you so very much.